Good evening, everybody. It's great to have you all here with us tonight. So many museum friends and people who come time and time again, sometimes even on the wrong nights, right? Well, it's my pleasure to have the opportunity this evening to paint the picture of the next era in the life of the Muscarelle Museum. And I'm very happy this evening to be welcoming Bill Butler, who is our lead designer from the world-renowned New Haven-based firm of Pelly Clark & Partners, who's going to walk us through the plans for our expanded facility in just a few minutes. But before I turn the program over to Bill, I wanted to spend a few minutes setting the stage and describing to you the why of what we are about to undertake. The museum, as you all know, sits here in the middle of the campus. You can see it right there. And was opened in 1983. It was helped along by the vision of President Tom Graves, Professor Miles Chappell, who had an amazingly important role in bringing this museum to life, and a group of generous donors led by Joseph and Margaret Muscarelle. The museum, as we know it, was built in 2 phases in very quick succession. So phase 1 opened in 1983. It was essentially a 1-floor museum. It had a couple of galleries, a few offices, and some storage space for art, along with a loading dock. But the idea was that that was a starting point. And so, after funding was relatively quickly secured, and I have to say they had a much smaller fundraising hurdle to jump over back in 1983 and 1985 than we do today. But after funding was secured, the second phase was undertaken. And the second phase accomplished a lot of what the first phase did not accomplish. More storage space was added, more offices were added, some additional loading dock capabilities were added, a graphic study room was added, and importantly, a second-floor sequence of galleries was added to the museum. And these galleries essentially doubled the amount of gallery space that we had had previously. And so we find ourselves today with a museum that is very proud and strong in many ways, but it increasingly limits what we can do. We've had a remarkable track record. We're looking forward to celebrating our 40th anniversary in 2023, and hopefully with the opening shortly thereafter of our new home, the Martha Wren Briggs Center for the Visual Arts. The project is slated to break ground late next year. It's going to include a renovation of the existing building, and the addition of a new substantial wing that will allow us to accomplish more than ever. We'll have nearly 3 times the exhibition space that we have today. We'll have new spaces for gathering, including a large event hall for special lectures and parties. We'll have some special seminar rooms for the study of art in our collection, and we'll have enhanced collection storage for all aspects of our collection. And as a side note, we'll finally have some offices for the staff. We have been working on this plan for many, many years. It's changed form several times, but in the end, I think we've come up with an approach that is both exciting architecturally and incredibly functional. And so at this point, I'd like to turn the program over to Bill Butler, who's going to give us a better sense of where we're headed. And I hope you're as excited as I am about the direction that we're all heading in. Welcome.
Thanks, David. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, and most importantly, to see this project take form and actually get built. It couldn't be more exciting to any of us than to really look back at how we began. So as architects, one comes to a new place and one needs to understand it. And you need to get a feel for, if you will, the DNA of the environment and really have some sense of connection to it, so that when you build, you actually can make that connection and let it continue. So Williamsburg, as an architect, it's one of the most important cities in this country. Planned, one of the few truly planned cities that started from the beginning, 1699. A grand vision that set the Duke of Gloucester Street as a connection between the capital and the university, the college. And so when one looks at that and you begin to then look at the DNA, if you will, of the William and Mary campus, and clearly the Wren building, the oldest university building in the United States, or the second oldest university, is a building of great notoriety. It was designed by Christopher Wren. He had the actually first professional office in Britain, Office of the Works. And so in this Bodleian plate, 1740, one sees the kind of, I don't know, it's an unknown anonymous artist, but this great mixture between grand geometric vision and then actually the flora and fauna that surround it. That kind of combination, if you will, of geometry and nature, something that we see in this campus. And that kind of geometrical order in which the Capitol Garden or the Governor's Palace Gardens were planned set a tone, if you will, for how Williamsburg evolved and actually how the great ideal of the American vision for new cities. So the Wren building is clearly something that we have looked at and that we see as this great foothold within the campus, a building that we respect, but a building that we would never think of copying because that simply would not be the thing to do in this time. We look at the building to begin to get a feel for the DNA of how it is made, the craft of the brick, the way in which it's encased, but most importantly, looking at the structure and the order of the design to get some feeling, if you will, for the sense of proportion and order, a kind of geometrical underlying bone network that then we could begin to build something new from. So then we also begin to look at the campus at large. So as an architect, you stand and you pull back at 30,000 feet to look at the overall evolution of the campus as it has started in the lower right-hand corner with its beginning, and begin to look at the geometric order of how the buildings are oriented and relate to each other. And clearly the central axis of the founding portion of the campus is then balanced, if you will, by the order of the addition along Jamestown Road. And those axes alignments then begin to set up grids that define public space. We always believe that public space is the order by which all great American campuses have been built. Public space then defines the edges of buildings. The campus master plan envisioned a number of infill buildings, and particularly along Jamestown Road, a belief that in this cultural corridor, there should be more order, so to speak, with the relationship to that road, and with it a street facade alignment that begins to somehow justify, if you will, and create a front to how the university faces the public on this western edge of campus. So then we took that order of the master plan and began to think about it. Now the campus also, much like the Bodleian plate, has phenomenal nature integrated with the built environment. And here with the amphitheater, also a gift of Martha Wren Briggs, that how that outdoor environment is then integrated with the geometry of the buildings to really create something that has made this campus an arboretum, a sense of public space that unites with the built form. Buildings of recent have continued the DNA of the original structures, but they've also, say in the Cone Career Center, begun to introduce a little bit more glass, a little bit more delicacy and scale and transparency, things that we have considered part of, well, the starting point for this project and how the campus should evolve. The Muscarelle Museum, quite well known, the color wall, the great sculpture, which we were thrilled again to see tonight, illuminated, presenting really, believe it or not, in an early sense of sustainability, because originally this was designed as a tram wall, something in the late 70s, early 80s. The water within these colored tubes had an energy retaining factor within them that then became celebrated with color as art. And then the phenomenal exhibitions that have been within this room and in this museum. These shows, which got great notoriety, on a local, national, and global level that really have set the museum on its path. So besides looking at the campus, one also then begins to design a building from the inside out. We have an inventory of the works that you had, the some 6,000 pieces within this collection as they continue to grow. And we consider each of these, if you will, an occupant of the inanimate side, but one that really begins to continue to occupy this new structure, to give it life, and really to give it purpose for people who come to visit. We begin with a lot of models. So we start with a lot of iterative options, testing things, before we ultimately come to what we feel through dialogue, through collaborative interaction with the college, with the university, and of course with the museum and its board, the best response. And so what you see here is the new structure as it begins to inflect and essentially mirror the form of the old Muscarelle to create and embrace a new public space as the entry court, the point of arrival off of Jamestown Road. And then those two walls, as they inflect towards that central axis, begin to define the entrance to the museum proper. A look at the building at eye level. What you see is heights have been restrained and incorporated to really take on this addition as though it feels natural. Glass is used to accentuate slightly more public functions. I mentioned the entry, which is at the center, and then on the far left-hand side, a corner staircase, which allows people, as they move from the ground floor galleries up to the second floor, to get a glimpse out to the landscape, to the adjacent surrounding buildings, before then entering back into the light-controlled galleries proper. So this DNA, we looked at the Wren building, the kind of ingotive module of building units and how those ultimately could become part of the structure of a new facade, a building modern, taut but delicate in its detailing, so that ultimately it has a level of refinement that many of the great buildings of the 18th century did, but yet still in a modern vocabulary. Very thin windows with daylight control allow the potential for some natural light to be viewed within a gallery. Obviously nothing that would harm the collection, but one that on a rainy day you could look through that veiled scrim and know that in fact it was still light outside. Entrances that have a little bit more glass to them, outdoor space which ultimately, working with our landscape designer HG Design, will be a space that ultimately can host great events. We know that Wine and Roses will probably continue to be indoors, but there could be many other events that could happen in this entry court. A view now from the southwest corner looking back towards that entry, towards this great lawn that sits in front of it, and then the prow of the new addition as it begins to turn the corner towards the west, with a view of the stair that's in there. Now, the grade of the land as it exists today comes from that sidewalk and drops quite quickly. The intent of the new project is to allow that elevation as it sits on the left-hand side here to continue down. And at the lower level, we will have the offices for the museum. The entry court will be filled, and with that create a flat table on which public events could happen. Perhaps maybe even students would come for revisit day. The museum may be the host for a number of university events that happen in the future. A central paved axis as it would go towards that entrance. And then ultimately the plan that begins to show you how this new wing complements and builds on the existing structure within the current Muscarelle Museum. So what you see on the right-hand side is the museum as it is today, with a few delicate renovations and insertions. In yellow, the area that you see down here in that lower right-hand corner is the Sheraton Gallery where we sit today. We are reconfiguring that to be a new set of galleries, rectangular in form so that walls at right angles will allow works of art to be hung in a conventional manner. And then to the north of it in the existing wing, painting storage, much of the support spaces as they exist today. The central axis of the entry in pale yellow forms this great entry and arrival hall, a lobby which will be a multi-purpose space for first legible orientation, entry into the museum and then being guided to the collections proper, or to classrooms. And you can see those in the left-hand side of the plan there in pale pink. Classrooms which are flexible, subdividable, that really will bring learning on display within the museum, have spaces that can be scheduled with the registrar, and really show the teaching mission of this great institution front and center for all those who enter into the building. As one then goes immediately upon entering at the center and turning to the left, that cross-axis extends to a window overlooking the gardens to the west. In dark yellow would be another exhibition space, some of that with the potential of windows onto the entry garden. And then against the western wall, a new assembly hall, which would have seating for a little bit over 150 people. So imagine a space that would have at least 50% more seats in it than you have in this room today. But a space that really puts on the ground floor some of the gallery that would be part of the exhibition space, most of the support and back of house areas in the old Muscarelle, and then teaching and gathering at the ground floor level where footfall is at their highest. Now looking at the level below, so from that central lobby area, there is a stair that would descend down to the basement. And in reality, this basement has all glazed windows along the left-hand side of the plan, as those offices would overlook the garden and the grade as it descends below. Back of house support for storage, mechanical areas, but also open office spaces for all those who would be docents, people who would work with the museum staff to ultimately keep this operation working and functioning. Zooming in on those plans, you can begin to see the modeling of the offices on the left-hand side, how they relate directly to the windows within them, conference rooms, staff rooms adjacent to it. Mechanical, it's a split plan on the upper right-hand side. A view of that in axonometric that shows the stair as it extends down into the basement level, offices adjacent to it, and then the western facade. And so this modeling of the brick and these repetitive panels that create a kind of tapestry, if you will, of glass and masonry extend. The glass of the stair on the very far right is then echoed in the projected bay window of the cross-axis in plan. And then at the very lowest level is that the building touches the ground lightly. One sees windows into the offices proper. We now have extended our walk further to the north, but again on the western side. So we're standing here, turning back to look at the gallery. On the very far right-hand side, you can see Boswell Hall. And then behind us would be Andrews, the other buildings that sit adjacent to this site. Looking at that west elevation, one can see in the very left-hand side of this facade an additional staircase. We believe that staircases, if glazed, will give people a choice of movement through the building, far more superior than using an elevator. Stairs also allow people to run into each other and have chance conversation. A view of the northern entrance. Now this we consider a second front door. If you can imagine, the public who may have come to this building from Jamestown Road, parked in the lot in front, would have entered the galleries from the forecourt. But really a large number of the population that use this building on a daily basis will be faculty, students, and staff who will come from the north. That lobby continues at that central axis to have a forecourt paved, perhaps with outdoor seating, perhaps also used for outdoor events that would allow a second means of ingress into the building. Going back to the ground floor, off of the lobby proper is a central staircase that arises. That staircase in the middle of the building would take you up to an upper floor. And here in this axonometric, you can see all of those public functions of assembly, gallery, support, and classroom. And in this entry hall, filled with natural light, one gets a sense of really the heart of the museum proper. Circulation is a point of animation. The staircase that you see on the left would be one that would connect from the ground floor up to the second floor galleries. Once you arrive at the second floor, you would continue on a bridge above that northern entry point to enter the old second floor galleries of the existing Muscarelle Museum. Central to that space, a piece of civic furniture where a greeter would act as concierge, a point of orientation for those who would enter the museum and have an interest in looking at something specific or perhaps no idea what might be on display at that time. A space that would then, as one pivots to look towards the east, you can see an entry on the right-hand side into the existing gallery, and in fact that cross-access would take you directly into the support areas, public washrooms, and then potential access into the gallery. The northern entry directly ahead as it would extend out. And then now at that northern entrance looking south, there's yet, at this glassy entry, the forecourt front doors, one has walked into the museum, a secondary bridge that would connect the existing Muscarelle on the left-hand side, its second floor galleries, to the new wing on the right-hand side. A zoom into the ground floor plan. Here in dark yellow, you see these prime public spaces that show the potential of flexible interchanging orientation galleries. The one that's in the Sheraton on the right-hand side perhaps is a gallery of the college, a point in which all students who come to visit the campus may have some orientation to the history of how this great institution started. The gathering space on the left-hand side, and then classrooms that sit above it. A sense of that room as you would enter it. 13-foot ceilings, multimedia potential in which at a raised platform, a dais could allow a speaker to stand, address all of you in unison. Windows that look out to the west that could be blacked out when needed, but still open if there's a discussion or a debate or perhaps even a lecture given by an artist in residence. Adjacent to that, classrooms, flexible in their layout, ultimately spaces that could change over the course of a couple of hours, but also spaces in which storage, and you can see in that central pink block, works on paper may be stored, where students could have classes in direct connoisseurship and encounter with the original artifact. You know, where a class may come in, class on prints, sit with the professor, pieces are then brought in, handled with utmost care, but students would encounter the work in firsthand as they learn more about the artist, perhaps the class that they're a participant within. Other classrooms with subdividable walls that allow for flexibility. Coming up to the second floor now, one gets this great suite of new galleries on the left-hand side as they begin to complement via the bridge the existing galleries in this old Muscarelle Museum. Structure laid out so that there are in gray surface zones which have both staircases, elevators to support the building, mechanical ducts, but a structural grid that allows for endless flexibility of wall placement. The plans are laid out much like the old second floor gallery of the Muscarelle, en suite enfilade, where the rooms interchange and allow you to sequence collections and exhibitions and change them over time. You know, any great museum will have multiple shows open at any moment. These pale yellow corridors show how the public could get to different portions of the collection so that you can choose at will the shows you see one right after the next, or the museum could elect to close one or two off as exhibitions are in change and resetting. Looking at that in greater detail, you can see the public elevator there adjacent to the main entry, takes you from the first floor up to the second, arrival point at the bridge that connects the old Muscarelle to the new wing, that corner staircase in the lower left-hand side, the southwest corner that becomes a sculptural prow, the plan as it continues to the north, and then another staircase that sits within that as it would extend fire egress as well as visitor access to the collection. Looking at that axonometric, you can see how those walls, the columns, can be interchanged and really create a multitude of endless permutations over the next 50 to 100 years. And then from that second floor bridge, here directly above the northern entrance, looking down into the lobby towards the second entry, the prime entrance off of Jamestown Road. Gallery space, 13 feet in height, hung with collections that exist within the museum today, but ultimately flexible in the way that they can be laid out to accommodate shows for the future. A view of the building from above. Here we are in the northwest corner, looking at how the new wing begins to angle and fold adjacent to Jones as it would extend, creating that northern entrance with its plaza directly adjacent to it. Looking at the old Muscarelle and how we will make accommodation for entry. We will let that secondary entrance, the one that exists today, still provide some access, perhaps to caterers more often than anyone else, but being part of the public promenade, that new mall that extends next to Phi Beta Kappa as it would go north. And then a view of the building from above. And what you can see is how we've embraced the old Muscarelle, reflected the composition to build new, creating then two framing walls that really contain this new cultural complex, both on the east and west, framing this outdoor public environment, and how that aligns with the ambition of Phi Beta Kappa currently under construction. And so with that, when you look at this museum and you think of it as a beacon really to a campus that extends a public space, a kind of cultural repository of artifacts, and how perhaps the inspiration of the color wall that exists there by Jean Meyer could continue perhaps in some light work to be commissioned in the future in the new wing. But a building that really, we believe, builds on the best of what exists today, puts ambition towards the future, and adding to the campus spaces which are modern but intrinsically based and connected to the original structures. And so with that, I'll just end with a quick animation that we did of a tour over the building and then going through it. Thank you all very much. Thank you. When you think back to your days in college, in your alma mater, You really bond to the institution through the built environment. I mean, there really isn't anything that does it more than a building that houses the great moments of your education or of gathering or really celebrating something special. And all institutions need those buildings. And there's no building on this campus that has that potential more than the Muscarelle Museum. And if you think about it, it has, every work of art is a kind of wormhole into another world, another time, another culture, and that connection becomes visceral and immediate. And it can really change lives. And that's why I think, being part of that and wanting to contribute to that is probably one of the greatest things anyone can do.
We are happy to take any questions. Some of you are beginning to see this time and time again, so I know the questions are getting answered bit by bit. Nancy.
David, it looks like to me that most of the emphasis is on two-dimensional art or display of two-dimensional art. Is there any accommodation in the prospectus for sculpture, textiles, pottery?
Yes, a lot.
Exhibition?
It's a great question, and there is a lot. And I think it was interesting, as I was looking at one of Bill's schematics, I was a little nervous that one of the triangular galleries upstairs seemed to have a lot of extra supports in the middle of it. Those were actually vitrines.
Correct.
That had three-dimensional works of art in them, as I sort of got my wits about me. We're thinking about outside sculpture, and we're also thinking about a lot of indoor sculpture as well. We have a number of pieces that are large and have been in the museum. Getting storage right now, we're looking forward to bringing them back, but also thinking about what else is out there. What else can we bring into the museum to help activate it and showcase an art collection that does have three-dimensional capabilities. We are collecting three-dimensionally. We just purchased a really interesting piece of Native American pottery, ceramics, and it's in a vitrine right at the back. Three-dimensional. We're doing a pretty dramatic expansion of our three-dimensional storage facility. So it's going from a small room, and it's going to inhabit the old painting storage here, which I think about triples the size of our three-dimensional art storage. So we are growing that part of our collection. Textiles, we're relatively careful with. We do have some textiles in the collection. Textiles represent a more challenging ongoing storage problem because they can harbor in ways that other works of art can't, pests. So anytime we take in a piece of textile, a carpet, anything that's fabric oriented, we typically take it through an isolation period, and then those sorts of things need to be checked more regularly than, for instance, a marble sculpture might need to be checked. So we'll be careful in the textile space. We do have a number of Native American baskets in our collection. We have a number of other things that have organic materials that are three-dimensional in nature, and we'll have an increasing opportunity to showcase those in the future.
I also think it's a build it, they will come phenomena. The entry court to this building will in effect give you an outdoor sculpture gallery. And there are lots of much larger, much older institutions that have public works in storage that they'd much rather loan to you and have in your entry.
And we also, from an outdoor sculpture perspective, we'll be working pretty closely with the university. Most outdoor sculpture that goes onto the campus is part of our collection, and we're going to be thinking about ways to sort of modernize some of that sculptural activation that we have across campus. And we also have a backyard that went under quite a bit of construction in the not too distant past as some of the physical plant for the university was renovated and the new heating system, the steam plant was put in down near Crimdell. We'll be reactivating our backyard as well. We have one or two sculptures planned to go into that area. Yes?
Can we talk about dates, starting completion, at least what is planned on paper?
Yes, which always moves. It's moved many times in our long association. We're practically like brothers now. We've known each other for the past 45 years, it seems. But we have been working together for the past like 6 years, maybe. We are hoping to break ground late next year. We're working on the calendar and hoping to compress a few things, and then complete sometime in mid to early to mid third quarter of 2024. So running a little bit behind where we had hoped to be. We're really looking forward to reopening in our 40th anniversary year. We will make it our 40th anniversary year in some stretch. Maybe we'll all gather for a cup of coffee out on the construction site and say we're done, and then we'll continue the process into our 41st anniversary.
And what happens to the existing building during these dates?
We're gonna have to vacate. So we'll be in a temporary site yet to be determined. We haven't secured that temporary site just yet because we don't know a very precise start date. We're hoping that we can maybe move groundbreaking a little earlier in 2022, and once we have more firm dates, we'll start looking more seriously and systematically for where we might end up. Elizabeth. Gosh, this is the question that vexes Melissa and I. We always think we're done, and then we get 3 more months to program, or 6 more months to program. But we're essentially right now targeting probably the last show will close in this building late November of this coming fall. Fall of 2022. Any other questions? Well, I invite you to call me with questions anytime you have them. If you want to have a more detailed conversation about what we have in store, if you want to get engaged in perhaps helping to support our project, we're really interested in having those sorts of conversations. And I know many of you in the audience are donors to the project, so I thank you very much for that. But we're in a fundraising phase, we're in a project development phase, we're trying to get the plans into a final form and push this project along. We're really excited about it, and I think we have a very, very bright future for the Muscarelle Museum. So thank you all for coming tonight. Bill, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
From even to be with us and to share.
Thanks a lot. Around if has any questions.
Great. Thank you, everybody.